Well, everybody, welcome back to Mohawk Motors. My name is Jason, as you know, and I've been chipping away on my Duramax manual transmission project here. Left off in the last video, getting the cab up off of the donor truck so I can start assessing my drivetrain and getting the chassis harness pulled off of it, because I need to get the chassis harness onto my new chassis. What you can see, I've got the harness on here. Nothing crazy, exciting, or complicated or difficult in this project here. My standard procedure when I'm working on harnesses, especially factory harnesses, because you know this is a 2002, so this harness is 24 years old. And honestly, most factory harnesses that haven't been cut into and spliced into and screwed around with, typically I don't find any problems with them. GM, I'll give them credit. They did a good job routing and protecting the harnesses from the factory. It's when people get their grubby little fingers in there and think they're electricians using wire nuts and electrical tape and that kind of stuff is when you have problems. But anyway, so I went through this thing. I de-loomed the whole harness all the way to the connectors. I check everything out. I wipe off any dirt. I blow out all the dust and debris. Primary reason, I'm inspecting for damaged wires, anything that might have gotten pinched or a piece of road debris flown up and hit something and cracked or cut the insulation. I'm just doing a visual inspection to make sure everything looks good. And then I re-loom it, get the wire routed. For the most part, I'm following the factory routing. I did use some new clips because the ones in the frame, they always break when you try to take them off. So new clips. One change I made from the factory, the clips would have been drilled through the side and mounted over here. As I mentioned before, I don't want penetrations where the frame is 2 layers thick. It introduces moisture and debris, which causes corrosion. I don't want that. But there were some factory holes up here in the top of the frame that aren't used for anything. So I just used some different clips. I've got the wire mounted up high, everything routed safely. For the most part, following the factory routing, right down along, right to here. Biggest difference here, at least to this point, the diesel sending units only have wires for the fuel level sensor. There's no wiring for a fuel pump. Diesel trucks didn't have a pump in the tank. And that was honestly the primary reason I decided to use the 2002 harness from my donor truck instead of the 2003 harness from the donor frame, because it was for a gas engine, so it had wiring for an electrical pump. The connector is different. I would have had to change it, blah, blah, blah. It would have been more hassle than it's worth. This harness is going to be just fine. I clean up all my grounds. I'll show you when we get further up. And then once I've got my grounds attached, I paint over them. I'm trying to keep my grounds as clean as humanly possible, as resistant to corrosion as humanly possible. And then, as I had mentioned before, I wanted to incorporate the lift pump harness and the air compressor harness into the factory harness. So it all looks clean and neat, like it had been there straight from GM. So the lift pump, very simple. It's just a power and a ground. The controls are up under the hood. So I was able to run that over, tuck it in. I used the factory or the little Deutsch weatherproof style connector that the pump already had on it. Tucked right in, run along, and then I actually have some weatherproof Deutsch style connectors as well that I was able to use for the electric air compressor. So I've got that connected, those wires tucked in as well, runs right along. You can see I've got my connections for my ABS pump tucked in there, runs right up, comes along. Now this is the second spot on the frame for your main harness grounds. This ground is for your rear lights, trailer brake or trailer connector, and a few of the grounds for the four-wheel drive system. This is the ground wire for the lift pump. Now you can see here, this is how I clean off first. Wire brush, or in this case sandpaper, down to bare metal. I get my terminals down to bare metal, and then I've got a nice clean and fresh black oxide coated bolt holding them on there. I'm going to do the same here with my four-wheel drive harness, and this connects to the transfer case, the front differential, and a connector under the fuse panel as well when I get done tidying this up. And just a little glimpse into my process here. You can see I've got the whole harness taken apart, all of the looming taken off of it. I've cleaned the wiring as best I can. I've also gone through, and where there's branches, I zip tie so that I can get the branches put back together the same way afterwards. And then once I've done that, I start putting my looming on. In this case, the looming was in good shape, it was just dirty. So I wiped the grease and oil and stuff off of it, and now I'm going back through. And part of why I said, or why I inspect these things, why I go through the trouble of de-looming, is here's a good example right here. I'll try to show you. Well, you can see on this wire, and this is a ground wire, I think you can see we've got a break in the insulation there. Now I did ohm test it, and it's still making good contact. It's still conducting well through there. But with that break in the wire, remember this is going to be on the underside of the truck. So it's going to get wet. It's going to be exposed to road debris. Eventually that's going to corrode, and eventually it's going to lose connection, and then I'm going to have problems. Things aren't going to be working. I'm going to be grumpy about it, etc., etc. So before I go any further, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to repair that. In this case, it's a harness that should move very little, if any. So I'm going to do solder and heat shrink tube for that repair. And then I'll finish looming up the harness and get it routed where it's supposed to be. I've got my chassis harnesses sorted out here. So I've got the main harness that runs all the way to the rear of the truck, sorted, good. I've got my four-wheel drive harness that runs to the transfer case, good, sorted. And I've got my front, well, you can see the four-wheel drive and the front differential harness are connected. And here's my front differential harness, which includes the front differential breather, sorted out and routed as well. So everything where it should be, just like factory, only cleaned up. Wires have all been inspected. Damaged and poor quality loom has been replaced with newer loom that is clean and solid to protect all the wires. Oh, I got a spare. You belong over here. There we go. So everything good. I have not connected this ground yet because I still have at least one more ground to put in there. But this part I'm kind of excited about. If you recall earlier, I told you that I wanted to figure out how to run the lift pump using the factory fuse panel. And I think I've got it sorted out now. I've been looking at some connector pinouts for this is called the C3 connector. And then I've been doing some ohm testing, some resistance testing, because that's how I can trace a circuit through the factory fuse panel. And I think I've got this stuff worked out now that I know what I need to do. So I'm going to walk you through it, put on your electrical caps, and we're going to get into this. So let's just start out with my power supply, right? So this post right here is where your thick gauge red wire comes directly from the battery positive terminal and attaches to your fuse panel. And this is the 2002 fuse panel out of my Duramax donor truck. Okay, so my main power feed from the battery to the fuse panel connects right here. Now I want to trace that power to what would have been and what is labeled right here. Fuel pump, the factory fuel pump relay. Now because this truck was originally a diesel, it did not have a functioning fuel pump circuit. However, the fuel pump relay and the connections for the fuel pump relay pins are still in the circuit, the fuse panel here. I imagine it didn't save GM enough money to omit those things to justify making a whole different panel. So they just left them in there unused. Good for me, right? So power comes in, runs over. This fuse right here is the fuel pump fuse. So I've got my ohm meter set to resistance. Can you see it there? I'm going to touch my 20 amp fuse. You can see I've got 0.3, 0.2, 0.1 ohms of resistance on both sides of the fuse. The reason that's important, I want the fuel pump circuit to be a fused circuit. I don't want to just be connected directly to the battery, because should something happen, the fuel pump seizes up, it'll draw as much power as it can and potentially start a fire. So fuses are important. So I've got a 20 amp fuse there in my fuel pump circuit, which is important to note. That is the factory 20 amp fuse for the fuel pump circuit. Power comes in there and then it comes over here to post 30 for the fuel pump relay. So that is our power feed to the fuel pump relay. Right there, you can see 0 ohms from the main power feed all the way right to that post. So that means I get power directly from the battery through the 20 amp fuse coming into the load side of the relay. Now that'll run through. When the relay is energized, activated, power will come up, go through the relay, and come down on this side into post 87. Now 87 runs through, comes out on the other side under here to the C3 connector, which will be this one here. It's a red plug. And you can see here I've got a little zip tie run into. This is where the fuel pump power wire would have been had this harness, this truck, originally been equipped with an electric fuel pump in the tank. And that corresponds to this pin right here. So if I wedge my little connector in there, can you see everything still? And I connect to my T pin, now you can see I've got 0 ohms of resistance. So that is the load side of the relay. We'll come out there. So all I need to do is borrow a terminal from one of my parts harnesses. I'm just going to continue stealing pieces off of this harness. You can see I've got the required terminal right here. I'll take that terminal out, give myself enough room here to do a good splice, put it in, and then I will connect that to the power feed to the fuel pump in my harness. Why is all this important? Well, like I said, I wanted it to be a fused circuit to make sure if there were ever any problems, I didn't have a short and then a fire. And I wanted to see what size fuse the AirDog lift pump came with. So this is the relay pack that it came with, and the inline fuse that it came with. This would have been connected directly to battery power, was connected to battery power in the truck. So I can pop this little cover off. Boom, 20 amp fuse. So my fuel pump fuse in the factory panel is the same amperage as the fuse that AirDog recommends for their lift pump. So I'm all good there. And I have heavy enough wiring. Again, all designed by people much smarter than me to make this work together and be safe. Now comes the tricky part though. I need to control the relay. In a gas truck, the relay is controlled by the PCM. When the PCM wants to turn the fuel pump on, it provides a ground to the control side of the relay. So on the relay here, the control side, 30 and 87 are the terminals for the load. 85 and 86 are the control side. So I sorted through. I know that there is power always supplied to the control side of the relay when the ignition switch is turned on. So I went out to one of my other trucks, turned the ignition switch on, and tested terminal 86, which is right down here where my yellow zip tie is poked in. When the ignition is turned on, 86 receives battery voltage. So I know that is the power supply side or the power supply to the control side of the relay, which only leaves terminal 85, which is the bottom right terminal down here, as the control for the relay. Like I said, I know that the PCM controlled that by providing a ground. Hopefully you're tracking with me so far. The diesel PCMs do not have drivers in them to control a fuel pump relay. I've been looking all over the internet and I see the same thing from all over. Everybody says the same thing. The diesel PCMs do not have a driver to control a fuel pump relay. That's okay. All we need to do to control that fuel pump relay is give it a ground. As soon as I provide a ground to terminal 85, that will activate the relay, closing the circuit on the load side, and then send power to the fuel pump. The way I think I'm going to be able to do this, because like I said, obviously I can't run it directly from the PCM, I need to find something else, some other circuit that is provided a ground when the ignition is turned on. I'm pretty certain there are systems in these trucks that do that. I think the brake switch is one of them. No, that's not right. Anyway, I'm pretty sure there are circuits within this truck. So the next step, the next thing I need to do is I know 85 would have run to the PCM. So on the back side here, I need to go through the PCM connector, which I believe is, pretty sure it goes here in the middle as C2. I need to go through these pins and find which pin goes to terminal 85 on the top side here. So like I said before, terminal 85 is how the PCM controls that relay by providing a ground. So if I lay my connector there, I traced it out. Oh, I think it just moved. And that connects to B7. Yeah, my thing moved. Hold on. Bear with me here. All right, so I've got it situated. My lead is in my T-pin, which is in pin 85, which is the control side, the PCM controlled side of the fuel pump relay. And that comes on the back of the fuse panel here to terminal B7. You see there my resistance goes to 0 when I touch, open, touching. So B7 is where that comes to on the back side here. Now if I go over and look at the connector, this is the C2 connector. So over here at the engine harness, here's my C2 connector, and B7 is right there. Since I have this unplugged, I can just connect on this side, like so. And that green wire runs up and comes to pin 9 of the bottom connector on the PCM. I believe this is a white connector. I haven't taken it apart, so I'm not sure. But anyway, it connects into that pin. You can see 0 ohms. If I take it out, open, stick it back in, closed, open, closed. So that's where that goes. Now I've been digging and hunting the internet to try to find a pinout for this PCM, and everything I find, every pinout, every diagram, everywhere I see says that pin is for fuel pump relay control in all of these style PCMs. I find that curious because I would imagine GM, I mean, obviously, they made a Duramax specific harness. So I'm not sure why GM went through all the effort of running the wire and the pin and everything in the harness to the PCM to control a circuit that had nothing on the output side of it. As I showed you before, you know, that even if that pin worked and the PCM was able to switch that relay on and off, there's nothing wired into the load side. There's nothing that goes into the load port of the connection. So that PCM could have switched that relay on and off until the end of the world, and nothing would ever happen except turning that relay on and off. It wouldn't power anything, it wouldn't do anything. So I've been trying to wrap my head around this, and after thinking mostly in circles, I've figured out I'm just going to take that wire and splice it into the control side of the ignition relay. The ignition relay, PCM provides a ground to the ignition relay to activate it when you turn the ignition on. So if I add my control wire for the fuel pump to that same ground, it will also activate the fuel pump when I turn the ignition on. Now, if I ever need to not have the lift pump running for whatever reason, I can just pull the fuel pump relay and it'll shut it off, just like it would have a factory fuel pump. So, I think that gives us an operating plan, a workable theory on how to make that lift pump be controlled using all factory components. All we did was add the wiring and the fuel pump. So that means I can set this aside. I'm done with this for now. And I got to get my wiring done in here. I got to get my power supply to the pump, routed over here, connected into the back of the connector where I need it. And then I got to get my ground connected down over here. And she should be good. We'll have a 20 amp fused circuit to run that pump. Well, everybody, I think I'm calling it for the day. I got my, you can see I've got my power wire to the fuel pump spliced in and run right up to there. All my ground connections made down here on the body mount. I've got my paint on it to hopefully keep them sealed up and prevent corrosion for as long as possible. Everything's routed, tidy, hopefully trouble-free for a long, long time. I do still have, this is the power wire for my air compressor. Since the only plans I have for that are eventually some airbag helper springs and maybe onboard air to inflate tires or blow up like an inflatable raft or something for the kids, I'm pretty sure I'm just going to run this on a separate switch. I can't think of any reason why I would need it to come on automatically while I'm driving down the road. The only reason, all the applications I can think of and the things that I want to do with air should be just, I'll get it aired up to the point I want it and then shut it off and either continue on my trip or just not use it anymore. So I think that's just going to be wired standalone with a switch and a relay, I think. So that can be left out separate for now. I got to decide exactly how I want to do that. I know I want to keep the wiring. I want to keep the relay as close to the main power distribution box as possible. And obviously I want to have the switch to control it somewhere inside the truck or maybe under the hood. But other than that, like I said, it's not like I'm going to be doing air ride and putting the truck up and down and I'll need it to automatically come on when I'm going up and down the road or anything like that. It's only going to be maybe for inflating some tires, probably for some helper bags in the rear, and maybe blowing up an inner tube or something like that if I take the kids somewhere. So I'm pretty happy with it. I'm going to say that differently. I'm very happy with the wiring. I got all the old cracked and damaged looming replaced. So it's got all nice, fresh, clean looming to keep the wires protected. Everything is tucked and routed where it shouldn't have any issues. It shouldn't be in the way of anything or rub or chafe or anything like that. So feels good to have that done. I'm expecting my steering gearbox in the next day or two. Probably when that gets here, we'll get that installed. In the meantime, I'm just going to get started on cleaning things. I got a ton of cleaning and wire repair to do on the engine and the PCM, so I'm going to get going on that stuff. Nothing really to show you there. I'm just going to fix stuff like this where they've got 2 butt connectors within 2 inches of it. Like, that's just sloppy. I got some broken wires in here that I need to maybe try to figure out where they're supposed to be. I got this wire nut, which I can tell you for a fact is not right. So I got to go through all this and figure out what the heck is going on and get that corrected as best I can. Some broken wires in other places. We can see here this ground wire's got a bunch of electrical tape on it and all kinds of mess. Just generally a mess. Previous owners or whoever worked on this truck before, they got into the wiring and they shouldn't have. So I'm going to go through, get it all corrected as best I can, and then start getting stuff cleaned up. Jeez Louise. I don't know if you can see that rat's nest down there, but I can see at least one wire nut bunch of other stuff. Yep, we'll have a bunch of correction to do down there as well. But it can all be fixed. So that's it for now. I'll catch back up with you guys in a little bit once I make some progress on some of these repairs. Hello, everybody. So it's the next evening, back down in the workshop, obviously. I started my evening on a little side quest here. This is one of my neighbor's mower. I think he said it's been sitting for like a year or two. He was using it, stopped running, doesn't know why. Asked me if I could take a look at it, see what I can figure out. So, real simple on this one, at least I hope. There is a tube, this little guy right here. I don't know what to call it aside from a pulse tube. And this transfers the pressure pulses from the crankcase to the fuel pump. And as you can see here on the end, it was all boogered up. So it definitely was not relaying the changes in crankcase pressure to the fuel pump anymore, which would have resulted in no fuel to the carburetor. So I had to put some power to it because the battery is totally smoked, and work the starter loose. The starter was stuck from sitting. Got the starter loosened up so it would crank over. And I was able to pour some gas down into it and get it to fire. So I've got an oil filter, a new little pulse tube, and some oil coming for that. We'll get it running, and then I'll go through the rest of it and see if it works otherwise. It's been sitting for a while. I cleaned a lot of mouse nest out of that thing, and the tires look rough. So it may need a little bit more. But first things first, make sure the engine will run on its own, and runs well enough to actually power the thing and get something done. And since that started my evening, I figured I would come get into some of the wiring repairs that are needed on my Duramax engine here. And I fixed two. I had this purple wire that had double butt connectors in it. So I stole an end out of one of my parts connectors here and got that connected, spliced in, nice, good as new. And then you can see I've got a splice here in this black wire with a white tracer. So grabbed another end out. This one, let's see if it shows up here on camera. But you can see right there the insulation is broken and the copper inside is corroded. It looks to me like somebody had a Scotch lock on that wire at some point and then removed it and didn't bother to fix the insulation. As far as I can tell, not currently a problem, but definitely would have become one in the future. So went ahead and got that taken care of, new piece spliced in, heat shrunk, sealed up, good to go. And decided, if you recall yesterday I showed you there were some wire nuts in the harness over here. And I unwrapped the electrical tape around the wire nuts and was surprised with 4 wire nuts. So not sure what the story is behind this. It literally looks like the wires, they just spliced the wires back to each other. So I don't know if they got cut or broken or what at some point in the past. Obviously, this is not the correct way. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Wire nuts do not belong in automotive electrical wiring. They do not, ever. There's no circumstance, there's no reason, they do not belong here. So we're gonna get these cleaned out. Well, we're gonna get these removed. I'm gonna get these wires cleaned up as best I can. Everything's oily. I don't know if it was power steering leak or what. So I'm gonna get everything cleaned up as best I can, and then we'll get these spliced and heat shrunk back together. And then I'll finish trying to get these get this wiring cleaned up, make sure I don't see any more damaged wires or anything in here. From here back, it looks like it hasn't been messed with. So I'm optimistic that I'm not going to need to go any further into the harness. I can see over here I've got at least 1, 2 broken wires, or I have to trace this out and see if they are the same wire. But that's also, oh, there's the other end of one of them. So we'll have to figure that out. But bit of a not ideal situation. Again, everything is fixable, but I would have preferred to not have to do this. So get it cleaned up, get it fixed. I'll show you when I'm all done. Me standing here splicing wires, there's nothing to see. So I'll bring you back in a little bit. Closing in on 11 o'clock. I'm about to call it a night. I wound up finding a few more damaged wires than I expected to find. I found 2, you can see them here, 2 orange wires. Orange wires are almost always switched power sources, both of which had damage to the insulation. One of them, I guess it's been there long enough that it had corroded completely through the conductor. It was just basically an empty tube. So I had to splice a repair piece into that. The other one was cut and corroded. There was only like 1 strand of the wire left making contact through. So I had to cut that section out and splice a new piece in as well. I got all the wire nuts eliminated. I made another repair on another wire here that was partially cut. I found a ground wire that was completely cut that I repaired. So I don't see anything else wrong on this portion of the harness, which concludes the repairs to this connector. So I'm going to get this one wrapped up, loomed back up so it looks clean like factory. And then I'm probably going to call it a night. Not tomorrow evening, but the one after, I'll come back down. I'll get started on this connector. From what I've seen in here, I suspect I'm going to find, I showed you these 2 ground wires that are obviously broken, but I've got a hunch I'm going to find some other broken wires in here too. So that one will be next evening's project. And I haven't even gotten to, I've got this damaged wire that needs to be repaired. And search through all this stuff, make sure there's nothing in there. And just the harness in general is in poor condition. I've got some wires here that are pulled out of the looming, another butt connector over here that I want to fix. Like, we got some work to do to get this harness to a point where I'm happy. I don't know what that mess down there is going to be. I'm really hoping that it's just dirty. Oh no, I see at least 1 wire nut, so we'll have to fix that too. But let's just go through it a little bit at a time. See you in a day or two. So it's been a busy weekend. It's Sunday, a little after lunchtime. I'm wrapping up for now. I'm probably going to come back down later this evening, but I figured I'd give you an update on what I've gotten done this weekend. Some stuff interesting, as you saw. I did the pump rub eliminator kit in the transfer case. That was a merchant automotive kit. There's lots of people that make them. You can get them on eBay, Amazon, directly from like tons of people make these pump rub eliminator kits. So I got that installed in the transfer case. You can see I've also got a transfer case support bracket installed. Again, this one made by Merchant Automotive, but you can find these in a bunch of different places also. Easier to find for the Allison transmission than the ZF6 transmission, but they are out there. So I got that installed as well. If you're not familiar with these trucks, and especially this transmission, the reason I went to the effort and I spent the money to get that, the transfer case mounts directly to the rear half of the transmission case in this. There's no adapter in between. And I have seen online people having issues with the transfer case breaking this rear housing. It's usually, at least from what I've seen, it's only in like higher power or higher load situations. So truck pulling, drag racing, things like that. To my knowledge, I've seen very few, if any, that have failed or caused that failure in a stock application, which I don't think this engine is stock, but I don't plan on doing anything crazy with it. So I probably would have been just fine. But for the $100 to get the peace of mind, especially now while it's easy to install, everything is apart, I just went ahead, spent the money, and did it. And same with the pump rub eliminator kit. This transfer case appears to be a remanufactured unit. And I didn't see any signs of bad pump rub or anything inside the case. The snap ring that holds the rear half of the case onto the support bearing for the output shaft was starting to wear into the case a little bit. So I bent the ear a little bit. I talked about that more in depth in my all-wheel drive Silverado build in the 149 transfer case. Can happen in any of them. I'll put a link up here for you if you want to get a little bit more detail on that. But I got that on. I spent pretty much all day yesterday going through wiring in this thing. I've got all my grounds to the engine block cleaned up. I've got all of my wire looming, or all of my wire harness back in the looming repaired. You recall there were some wire nuts and stuff down here. I repaired those wires correctly, reinstalled the little wire support protector bracket on the front of the oil pan. A bunch of the wiring over here was, the loom was all degraded and cracking apart, so I did that, repaired that. Had a bunch of exposed wiring and worn out looming over on this side as well, so I've got all of that fixed. I've repaired every damaged wire I've been able to find, every wire connector that was done not the correct way. I've repaired all of that stuff. So I feel good about the electrical and the harness on this engine now. And the transmission and transfer case wiring is, I mean, super simple. There's one, this will be for the output speed sensor, which connects to the four-wheel drive harness and connects to there. And this is just for the reverse light switch, which just goes right over here. This is busted, obviously, so I've got a new pigtail coming, as well as a new switch that the housing isn't busted up. So we'll get that back in good shape. Got my transfer case breather routed up high where it should be. The clutch line when I took this thing apart was not, it was just kind of hanging out. So I've got that properly mounted on the little brackets like it's supposed to be. Whole bunch of stuff in here. I went through, I was replacing the bus bars for the glow plugs. You can see on the passenger side, I've got my new bus bar over here. Unfortunately, on the driver's side, one of the studs snapped off the end of the glow plug. So I have a new glow plug coming, and then I'll be able to get this bus bar reinstalled. As I had shown you before, this engine's got PPE high flow manifolds on it, PPE high flow up pipes on it, some kind of aftermarket downpipe on it. I can see it's got head studs in it of some sort. These are definitely an aftermarket head gasket. They're a multi-layer steel design. I'm not sure who or what makes them, but they are not the stock head gaskets from what I can see. There is a, looks like it's a little PPE boost increase orifice, or I don't know what you would call this, but I've seen that's in there now. We had the lift pump. So, I mean, the guy, he had said he spent some money on this engine, and it appears that he was being truthful with me. You can see all the aftermarket hardware here. You know, all these studs, they're all ARP studs and bolts and hardware. So, like I said, it ran good. Hopefully it'll run just as good when I put it back into this chassis. With my luck though, now that I've repaired all of those wiring issues, I'm gonna have issues. that's the way it goes. But we'll see what happens. I've got one more little tidbit I want to work on before I sit this thing back in the truck. This is the fuel filter housing. And I have seen people just eliminate this altogether when they have a lift pump. I don't want to do that. I want to retain it. But I noticed, or I guess I should say I discovered, this mounting bolt hole is stripped and this mounting bolt hole is stripped. This was the only bolt actually holding this filter housing where it belongs. So I ordered thread repairs so I can fix these two bolt holes and then have 3 bolts mounting this filter housing the way it should be. And once that's here, I think I'm just going to give it a little bit more of a cleanup. I may try to freshen up the front of the engine a little bit, get that looking a little bit nicer. It really just depends on how long it takes for my motor mounts to get here. That's the part that I'm waiting on. So once the motor mounts get here, I'll probably cease tinkering and tidying and making nice and start putting back together. I really want to get this drivetrain into this chassis to free up the space, because I have some other things coming up that I need to do. I have a parts truck that I got to get pulled apart, both to use parts for this project, but I've already sold the drivetrain out of that parts truck, so I got to get those pieces pulled out and ready to go to their new owners. And I can't do that until I make some space in here. It's Monday night now. I left off yesterday early afternoon. What have I done here? I did come down earlier today with my little guy, my helper, and we repaired the stripped out bolt holes for the fuel filter housing here. Installed some helicoils in those, and we're able to get this mounted back properly the way it's supposed to be with appropriate length bolts. I think what might have happened, the bolts that they had were too long, so I think whoever tried to do this before mixed their bolts up, used too long a bolt, bottomed it out, and stripped the holes. So we've got that fixed. I am going to retain the factory filter. I I don't see any harm in additional filtration. I do have a new filter on the way for it. So I'll have the fuel water separator and filter on the lift pump, as well as the OEM style filter here on the passenger side valve cover. Like I don't see any harm in it. I'll still have plenty of fuel to the engine, and I'll know that everything going into it is clean, clean, clean. I tidied up a bit more wiring. I found some little odds and ends over here that needed to be done. The connector wire from the glow plug harness, excuse me, from the glow plug bus bar on the driver's side over to the passenger side. At some point, somebody had pulled that out and just had it draped over the top here. So I got that routed back where it's supposed to be. I was able to go out and look at some of my other Duramax LB7 trucks that I have here to reference and get these wires tucked back in a bit more neatly and organized. And as you can see, I got my stainless fuel lines on here. And hopefully this will help any of you guys who decide to replace fuel lines on your LB7. I ordered the Dorman stainless steel fuel line kit. And everything, all of this stuff, the frame, the lines that run along the frame rail, the flexible lines here, the line from the cooler to the tank, all of that stuff fit fine, worked well, no issues there. But they're hard lines that mount on the engine. This actually is not the Dorman lines. These are the lines that were on the truck since I bought it. I pulled them back off, made a few corrections because whoever installed them before didn't do the best job. They bent them up a bit, so I got them bent back into the proper shape. You can see I've got them all retained here in all the factory locations. So they'll stay where they're supposed to be. They're nice and secure. They're not going to vibrate around or anything like that. And they connect right back up to the factory fuel lines. The Dorman lines, I put them over in storage. The biggest problem with the Dorman lines was these flexible lines right here are too short. And they're not good quality PTFE braided because to try to make the bend up to here, they kinked. And then the fitting end that's supposed to snap over the hard line was not made correctly. It was too shallow, so the end of the male portion was bottoming out in the fitting before the little snaps could go over the collar to engage. And I tried modifying them and cutting them off and doing stuff, and they were not going to work. And I went online and looked around. Apparently a bunch of people have had the same problem. And because even with a lift pump, if I remember correctly, that lift pump maximum output pressure is 13 PSI. I see a lot of people that they cut the braided lines off and cut the end of the line and just use a rubber hose and a hose clamp, which would probably be fine. But it's not what I wanted to do. And like I said, these lines were already on the truck and they're stainless. They're in good shape. I'm not worried about them and they look nice. And I was able to, they connect up to the rest of the Dorman system just fine. So I'm going to run those. I feel very good about that setup. And it's clean, it's organized, it's factory plus, if you will. So at this point, I'm stuck. I ordered, a couple days ago, I ordered heavy duty motor mounts, a little bit different style than the factory motor mount. Those should be here by the end of the week. And same with the transmission mount. I actually just ordered a factory replacement automatic or transmission mount for it. Reason being, when I do upgraded motor mounts, I like the motor mounts to be a bit more I don't want to say rigid, but a bit firmer than the transmission mount. Because obviously this thing's going to make a good amount of torque, and being a manual transmission, potential for a shock load. And I want the motor mounts to be stiffer than the transmission mount so that if the engine torques, the transmission mount will allow it to flex. And worst case, the transmission mount will break. Before, I've seen trucks crack bell housings, break bell housings, all kind of issues. I don't want to have that problem. I've been getting a lot of suggestions on Facebook Marketplace recently, and it seems like the market on these ZF6 transmissions has drastically gone up since I bought this truck. So even more reason I really do not want to have any problems, and I do not want to cause any problems. So in case you're wondering, transmission mount, a little bit softer, a little bit more flexible than motor mounts, in my opinion. I did also get the frame side brackets blasted, painted, and installed. The zinc plating, the factory zinc plating on those bolts was still really nice. So I didn't bother stripping all of that off just to replate with my black oxide. I think they're going to be fine just how they are. I'll probably never see them again. So I felt no reason to mess with that. And new steering gearbox is in. All my steering components are in. I think I had mentioned before, I'm using tie rod sleeves. There's no reason, I'm not doing anything with this truck that's going to require big, huge aftermarket tie rods. The tie rod sleeves are more than sufficient. It allows me to run a bunch of factory parts. I don't have to buy those super expensive upgraded tie rods or anything like that. So I think that's it. I can't think of anything else that I can do until either more parts show up or I just stumble across something else. I'm also getting my wisdom teeth removed tomorrow, and I'm supposed to take it easy for a couple days after that. So I probably will not be back down here. It feels like a good time to wrap this video up. I can get it edited while I'm on light activity and get it out for you guys. So hopefully the beginning of the next video will be me dropping the engine and drivetrain into this chassis. I am really excited to get it sitting in here and see how it looks. So that's it. Thanks a lot for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Till the next video, everybody. Take care.